to our session on intelligent automation. My name is Dale Jablonsky. I'm a director with KPMG here in town. I also have Kirke Everson. He's a managing director at KPMG from the federal practice in the DC area. And then I have Payam Mousavi. He's a solution specialist, a director at KPMG based out of LA. So we have a very interesting presentation for you today. The track that we are in is called citizen engagement. But the gist of this presentation is that if you do not have a full-blown transaction presence online e-government, you really can't get into the rest of the citizen engagement track. There are other citizens engagement sessions around the Amazon kind of model of really knowing your customer and being able to predict what your customer's needs are. There's another model on integrating social media with your web app and letting those channels also run a lot of your business. None of that is possible if you don't have basic transaction processing on the web. And a lot of you are struggling with that because you have legacy systems. So this presentation is a home run presentation for anyone who still has legacy technology and is struggling to get their web presence in a transaction mode, not in a store and forward mode like a lot of applications today where you don't see your transaction actually take effect. It's like you deposit money in the bank and then you get to see it show up 2 weeks later. That's not real transactions, right? So, so this is very key for that whole concept. How many of you saw PK Agarwal in our keynote? So this is a natural extension, probably a little bit more applied and less Hollywoodish than what he did. So this is my last slide, and I'm turning it over to the real people here. In 2003, 2004, Department of Finance took all of our vacant positions. They did it again in 2009. So you've been downsized, and you never really got permission during all of these budget problems to rehire all those people. Plus, the California population went up. The expectation on service delivery has gone up. Security demands have gone up. So while you've been downsized or flat, demand for your services has gone through the roof. And your only choice in that scenario is to deliver less or less qualified services. Because in California, you have to throw manpower at service delivery if you don't have this kind of automation in place. So this is not a digital labor presentation where you're trying to take jobs away. This is a survival presentation. How do I survive? How do I get back to decent service delivery with the web presence? Oh, by the way, that all generation X, Y, and Z expect. Even as a baby boomer, I expect this stuff because I'm a digital pioneer, and I believe that everything should be like Amazon. And so these are your major drivers on why people are doing this. And how many of you represent the business, not IT, for your organization? Raise your hands. And then how many of you represent the IT side of the organization? Okay. So IT people, take note. If you don't embrace this technology, your business could pursue this without you. They could pursue this without you. So you should want to get out in front. And some of the use cases that Kirke and Payam are going to talk about are even how IT can be an early adopter. So keep in mind that the reason they created chief data officers and chief innovation officers is because CIOs weren't taking that bull by the horns. And so they're getting left behind. This is not a case where you should be left behind again, and you should be embracing this, this new concept in intelligent automation. So there's several use cases that they're going to walk you through, and I'm going to turn it over now to Kirke Everson.
Make sure we don't bump each other off the stage up here. Thanks, Dale. Real quickly, by a show of hands, how many folks have heard of this term, intelligent automation? We got about 5 or 6. Any other terms that you guys heard? Anyone heard of digital labor? Yeah, intelligent automation is what the analysts are calling it, and that's what we're calling it at KPMG. And the reason is because I think digital labor has a different connotation, especially in the government space. And as Dale eloquently put it, I mean, there's a survival mode that we're in government, and you know, we need to figure out how we engage our citizens and how we do a better job with less. And so this is one of the many things that we can think about when we think digital transformation. So if you look across the spectrum of digital transformation, everyone has the idea in their head of, okay, I've got a mobile app now, I can engage on certain things. You know, there's cloud solutions, there's business and intelligence tools, data and analytics. I think there's a number of other sessions around data and analytics. Internet of Things. How many folks have something that's IoT enabled in their house? Anyone got an Echo? Anyone got a Nest thermostat? I mean, it's pervasive, right? You know, you look back at one of the little cyber thing. Home Depot got hacked because of a thermostat that had a password that was default, right? So, you know, you think about some of these things and how the Internet of Things is changing the way that we're looking at the world. So when we look at the digital transformation environment, we have to look at things differently now. And so if you look at this slide, you can see that really today we're talking about just one aspect of digital transformation, and that's around intelligent automation. So what I'm going to try to do today is give you guys really a sense of what intelligent automation is. We at KPMG tend to kind of break it into 3 different classes just for simplicity's sake. It's not meant to be a continuum or a maturity model. It's really meant to be a spectrum of the offerings that are out there. And so the first couple are in that first block, robotic process automation, which are the more basic and enhanced process automations that will probably be more pervasive in the government space for the next 2 to 5 years. And then you've got cognitive automation that we'll get into in a little bit, and that's a bit more labor intensive as far as training the data and getting your organization to invest in that kind of technologies. And so as I mentioned, there's really 3 classes. So if you look at that first block on the left there, that's what we call basic process automation or robotics and process automation. Anyone ever heard of RPA, robotics process automation? It's really, if you think about it, anyone ever built an Excel macro? Raise a hand. Yeah, a lot of macro builders in here. So if you think of it that way, it's kind of like an Excel macro across different, across the presentation layer, across different applications. And so really, it's called a bot. It's really a software agent, and we'll get to kind of the myths of what it is and what it isn't in a second. But you know, you're in essence integrating at the presentation layer versus integrating at the back end through APIs and other calls and SQL queries. So as Dale mentioned, in the legacy environment, when you've got various applications that are disjointed, they're not integrated, there's basically this conglomerate of silos of excellence. This class of technology enables you to integrate that at the presentation layer. So you're literally watching the screen, the mouse move on the screen, and a bot is doing all the things that a user would typically do. So by a show of hands, how many folks would love to automate a very manual process they do today at work? That's just, they hate doing it. It's a monthly report. It's something they just can't stand doing, and you're literally cutting and pasting and cutting and pasting. This can automate a lot of that so that you can spend your time doing more value-added transactions with the customer, citizen engagement increases, and you let the bot do the things that you really wouldn't like to do anyway, right? And that can be done on the weekends. That can be done at night. It's 365, 24/7. And oh, by the way, that bot, you don't have to really continuously change it unless there's a system change. So it'll constantly do what you tell it to do without complaining it didn't have a lunch break or, the coffee break. So it's a really cool technique that has been out there for a little while in the IT testing arena, but they've actually, because of, I think PK put it up there nicely today, because of the cheap ways you can get compute, the enablement of cloud, these tools are now becoming more pervasive. And there's a number of vendors in this class 1 space, but so think of it as macro-based, enabling you to kind of integrate at the presentation layer. Then you get to the enhanced process automation. And so now you start thinking about, okay, how do we get the process a bit smarter? And so you start to introduce things like machine learning and natural language processing. PK mentioned that this morning. Chatbots is a great use case here where if anyone's ever kind of, so I travel up and down the Northeast corridor. I'm an East Coast guy in DC. Amtrak's got their own little chatbot, and you can type in and get responses. I think Verizon has a chatbot on their website now. So it encompasses natural language processing as well as all those data sets that you ingest into that particular chatbot to then start increasing your citizen engagement. So again, this really is meant to reduce some of the, for a chatbot use case, reduce some of the call center, basic tier 0, tier 1 type technologies. And then finally, you get to cognitive automation. So think of this as the IBM Watsons of the world, right? I mean, this is a very large investment, a very large amount of time to train the data, because as PK mentioned this morning, this isn't a computer operating on a program. This is a computer learning with a bunch of different data sets and a corpus of data sets. And so one of the biggest use cases you see with Watson is Watson Health, right? It's taking Sloan Kettering's data and it's ingesting decades and decades of data through imagery data, MRI data, and actually allowing doctors the power to diagnose things that they couldn't diagnose in a matter of weeks. They're doing it in a matter of hours. So these are very large data sets that you have to train over time. And there are very, very specific use cases in government around this, and I'll get to that in a second. But so I just wanted to outline that briefly, and I'll go into some specifics to kind of show you some examples, and then Payam's going to actually go into more specifics around use cases in the business side and the IT side. All right, so some myths that I'd like to dispel today. So there's not an actual physical robot sitting next to you in a cube. I don't know if you guys are fans of Westworld. I like Westworld. There's not some people that are Westworld hosts running around your office. But again, it's a virtual bot for that class 1 that's programmed, that's on a different platform, that you can actually enable your users to program on their own once they're trained up on the technology. Intelligent automation is new for the public sector. That's not exactly true. There's been some use cases in the federal government around this. There's actually some pretty cool use cases that we'll go in a minute. But again, I mentioned Excel macros. But I have noticed that even in the federal government, that a lot of folks are starting to get really smart on this really quick. Because they've used it in one way, shape, or form, as I mentioned before. It's just taking that technology to the next level. And again, as I mentioned, this is not a replacement for labor. This is not a labor replacement. This is not labor arbitrage. This is labor augmentation. So that you can actually, like I said, automate those things that you're just behind on, you don't like to do, so that you can spend more time with engaging the citizens or doing more value-add tasks. RPA is just as secure as another user on your network. So if you think class 1, you assign that bot, sometimes we give them funny names like, John Doe or bot number 1 or, Skynet, for those of you who are Terminator fans. But you actually give the bot a username. You give it access to the various applications it needs to get access to. You monitor the full audit trail of that bot, and they do have full audit trails, which is more so than what you would have with a user sometimes. So it's fully auditable. It operates on your network within your network constraints, and it's very light on the IT side. So for you IT folks in the room, you can enable this without any back-end configuration. So here's an example of class 1, and I kind of talked a little bit about this, but if you look before the automation occurs, you've got a lot of manual data entry, you've got a lot of manual checks and validations going through the process. And so how many folks have to, in their organizations, have to process applications? A few. Maybe not your specific office, but your organization has to. So part of automation, in this case, is you're getting a lot of data fields that are pretty structured for the most part, especially online applications. And so instead of having people pulling that data in this case, and having to check for validations of the data and verification of applicability, you can actually have the bot pull some of that data down, check for missing information, do pre-validation of those data pieces, and actually automate through other third-party systems the verification and validation of that data. And so that way, when you get to the end of the automated process, those same people that were inundated with a lot of these manual processes can actually focus on the citizen engagement piece of that application and actually move it quicker through. So a lot of those application backlogs go down because you're actually moving your throughput a lot quicker. So the next piece, I think I mentioned this earlier. So North Carolina is using a chatbot for their internal, they've got an innovation center down there, their internal IT help desk. So for tier 0 and tier 1, they're actually automating a lot of that. 90% of their call volume was centered around password resets, right? they automated 90% of that. So think about what those IT technicians can now focus on as far as keeping their availability up, focusing on upgrades, focusing on maintaining cybersecurity. So you're again enabling your workforce to do more with less. And then class 3, cognitive. So the government, both state and local and federal, are starting to get their eyes open about this. I mean, you look at, I mean, who saw the H&R Block Super Bowl commercial with IBM Watson? It was pretty cool. But different application of Watson versus the health one I gave you. But there's so many different use cases that you can use for cognitive if the investment dollars are there and you can train the data and the data is available. One example is actually Europe is doing really well on this. The city of Enfield in Europe is using cognitive to engage its citizens through IBM Watson. So really neat use case there. There was actually, and on the federal side, the National Institute for Health is looking at cognitive computing for pretty obvious reasons. They want to understand the correlations around healthcare and how it impacts the public. And so think of those use cases that relate to that, you know, the CDCs of the world, the NIHs of the world, the CMSs of the world. So, you know, the other example, I think PK mentioned this morning, is fraud detection. So understanding through volumes and volumes and volumes of data, what are certain patterns that are just outside the norm, that may not hit that normal, you know, human recognition, but that, you know, a computer that's constantly retraining itself and learning the data can understand. I mean, think about the opportunities for fraud detection there and the savings for the government. So a lot of different use cases around this. You just have to be ready to invest in class 3 and cognitive and have the data and have the ability to train. And one thing I wanted to underscore here is this is not successful unless you have the folks that understand the business. You know, anyone can, frankly, in this room, I mean, you guys can build a bot if you had a 6-hour session on how to do class 1. It is very easy. You literally hit record on your computer, do what you need to do, hit stop, and that's basic automation, just like a macro. So there's a lot of opportunities to democratize this in the workforce, right? So, I mean, but you know the process the best, and your workforce knows the process the best. And so to make this work right, you need the engagement of your workforce to be able to make this successful.